Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. It is Thursday. We are working on the penultimate video for this week's theme of Dissonance, looking at tracks that play around with disharmonious elements in all sorts of music. Today we're going to be checking out a band with a really cool name, actually. We are looking at Deathspell Omega, which just sounds like the most epic D&D spell I've ever heard. Yeah, I've heard these guys once before on a live stream, but off the top of my head, I cannot place a sound or a genre to the name. But given the font that they're using here, mixed with the name Deathspell Omega, I'm kind of thinking it's going to be something a little heavier. Alright, let's get into this. This one is called Abscission. Yeah, getting right into it. Really technical stuff going on with the drums there. Yeah, all over the place. Snares, cymbals, toms. We got some tonal dissonance there in the guitar work. Yeah, so we were in 4/4 and now we've shifted to a 10-beat phrase, which, judging by the phrasing itself, feels like a 4 and a 6, but it's probably written in 5/4. And this has moved to a 6/8. Keeping that intensity in the drums, they really are driving a lot of the chaotic elements. Very interesting yell there at the end. It almost sounds like the guitars are in a slightly different tempo. I don't know if it's just the rhythmic aspect. It sounds like it's delayed by just a hair. Yeah, so this is lined back up. Going in real hard in this moment. I mean, the whole song has been real hard, but they finally entered a really strong groove aspect. You know? It almost sounds like the guitars are operating on a super subdivision there. Every time I start to get into a groove, they change it up on me. Really deciding on mood with the chords as well. It's extremely dark and ominous. move back to that 6 pulse, although there's a very strong 4 feel here as well. The drums are giving the 6 feel. Yeah. Here I think we're in a 6/4. We have a 12-beat phrase at least. It's also the first time the guitars have really taken a strong melody lead. And extremely distorted. Those snare hits on every other beat, just 4/8 notes, and the way they're mixed are crisp. Interesting. That final section, we were still in the 6/4, at least what I was feeling. It might have been written in 12/8, which is a little bit more common, a more common meter. But the very last phrase was actually a 14/8, and I suppose it could have just been that beat 1 was the second to last note, and then the and of beat 1 would be the note that's held out for the end. It doesn't necessarily need to have been written in 14/8. It just felt that way. So yeah, this is interesting because it takes the same ideas we explored yesterday with Imperial Triumphant, of injecting dissonance into every aspect of the song, and it does it in a completely different way. Imperial Triumphant was going for more of a, I don't know, like an atmospheric, droney kind of thing. I mentioned at the end of the video that it felt very avant-garde classical to me with a metal instrumentation to it. This is straight up black metal, I believe. At least that's what I think it is. We have the really harsh growls, we have the constant attacks, rhythmic complexity, but it's done so in a way that takes the core concept of black metal, which I typically find to be, I like the mood that they're going for, but it tends to be a little too repetitive for me, especially some of the earlier black metal that we've checked out, and provides sort of a proggy twist on it by playing around with time signatures, not being afraid to go into a halftime there at the end. I mentioned that the rhythmic complexity had given way a bit, and instead of just a constant slew of attacks from the guitar, we began to see a little bit of melodic work in there as well. So we get some proggy elements there, and instead of just creating texturally cool sounds to give it that black metal feel, instead they're specifically targeting dissonant harmonies to get that extra dissonant texture added to the music. So it's black metal with a twist, and I will say that I dug the twist. It was still a lot to take in. I still got to warm up to it, but I enjoyed some of the elements they brought to the genre and shaped it into something that I like more than most traditional black metal that I've listened to. Now, right out the gate, these guys presented what the song was going to be from second one. You push the play button and you get sonically assaulted. Drums come in, guitars come in, it's heavy, it's brutal, it's fast, it's rhythmically complex. The drums are doing this really cool thing where they are constantly playing 16th notes, maybe, but moving all over the kit. They are not doing a typical, alternating snare and bass with like a hi-hat moving, a hi-hat thing going with it. They are doing a constant drum fill, basically, going from snares to toms to cymbals, back to toms, back to snares, to cymbals, to snares, and just constantly moving. There is so much energy, kinetic energy there at the beginning. It is just a sonic assault. It is a lot of sound coming at you all at once. And perfect thesis to the song. It embodies pretty much everything that the song is going to do. Now, it did catch me off guard a little bit because we started that in 4/4, and aside from the drum solo, the extended fill, whatever you want to call it, it embodied a lot of traditional black metal. We were in 4/4, lots of attacks, just a really harsh sound overall, and I figured that's what we were in store for. And the very next section flips that on its head, and we enter into an interesting meter. Well, I should say an interesting rhythmic flow, a pulse, if you will. And they were alternating 4 and 6. So we went into this segment. They carried over the 4/4 from the previous. We get a bar of 4, and then we get a bar of 6, which means we're expecting the 4. And when we're ready for the next bar's downbeat, which is beat 5 of this 6, we're not getting that emphasized 1. Then the next beat comes, and we're not getting the emphasized 1. In fact, we're getting a repetition of what we just heard in beat 4. And it feels like time's getting stretched. And then the next beat is the beat 1 of the next bar. And we're like, okay, maybe we've shifted to something a little more, a little different. We're not in 4/4 anymore. The next bar brings the 4 back. And so for a first time listen, that opening is very disjointed. It's difficult to get into that groove, especially since they've set it up. The first 30 minutes or so, they said, hey, we're in 4/4. It's pretty standard. We got a pretty typical black metal sound going on. This is going to be some comfy music if you enjoy this genre. Settle in and listen. And it does not take long for them to pull the rug out from under you and be like, psych, we're actually a little proggy. Check this out. So, we alternate this 4 and 6, and I think that's really clever. Because 4 and 6 is 10. When you add them together, 10 is divisible by 2, you get 5, which makes it's a 10-beat phrase. We do the 4 and then the 6, and then the 4 and then the 6, and then the 4 and the 6. So we have a 10-beat phrase in total that gets repeated. And instead of alternating 4 and 6 in the sheet music, I would just keep it at 5, where the first group, where your accents are going to be beat 1 and beat 5 of the first bar, and then no beats in the second bar. It's just easier to write that way. It's easier to keep track of if you're reading, especially if you're sight reading. You don't have to worry about changing your counting all the time, every other bar. But I've mentioned in the past that 5 typically gets broken up into sets of 2s and 3s. 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3, or 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2, whether you want the beginning to drag or you want the ending to drag. This allows them to subvert any expectations coming in. They've already set up the song, the intro being in 4/4, so they can keep that bar of 4/4 there, which is going to lead you into a false sense of security and understanding of the song before they bring in that 6, and then they bring the 4 back in and provide a little bit of confusion there. If they had shifted to the 5 immediately and done the 2/3 or the 3/2 within the bar, I don't think the effect would have been as felt. Usually I'm pretty good about catching new time signatures. There have been times in the past when it just kind of flies under my radar, and maybe I catch it as we're leaving the section. I didn't even know we were there, and 1 bar to go, and I'm like, hey, wait a second. we shifted to 5 or something, and then we move into the next area or whatever, and I missed it. It practically just flies under my radar. That's how you do it. You try to make them as smooth as possible. This is the opposite. It made it as jarring as possible while also allowing you to believe that we weren't changing because the first bar feels the same as the previous section. Is really genius. Now, I don't know if any of that's intentional. I don't know if they wanted to go out and make it for these ideas, but it makes the song feel more disjointed by not trying to hide the time signature into grooves that feel closer to what everything else around it is doing. It calls attention to that 6 very strongly, which adds to the dissonance of the song. So, yeah, I mean, obviously dissonance is the style they're going for. The whole song is just a wild ride, beginning to end. We have dissonant harmonies, we have dissonant textures, we have dissonance in the time signatures, we have dissonance in feels. They're just really playing around with making the song difficult to listen to by keeping it extremely disjointed. Now, after this section, I think we return to a 4/4, and then after that, we move into this nice 6/8 section. And the 6/8 really comes from the drums, because the guitars are kind of pulled it back a little bit. And if we are in 6/8, then they are playing dotted quarter notes. They're kind of holding these notes out. And if you listen to just the guitars and assume there's a tempo drop, you can probably feel a pretty strong 4/4 from them. However, the drums, specifically with the cymbals, have moved to a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, with these emphasized 1s and 4s. And those 1s and 4s are going to be the beginning of the guitar notes as well, which is where you're going to get that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and you can feel that 4 pulse in the guitars. But as you can see, the tempo comes way down. The space between the counting is much larger than the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's pretty constant. But probably because the drums are so prominent, probably because they seem to steal the show for me the entire time, and probably because the drums drove a lot of time signature changes throughout the song. This was our third time signature change, well, second change, third time signature. I'm expecting the 6/8. However, that section could be written in a slower 4/4. It isn't really until the end, when we hit a major tempo shift, when we hit the halftime, that really would make me go back and say, oh, maybe we were playing around with tempo earlier and we stuck in the 4/4. We reverted back to that intro meter and dropped the tempo a bit. So yeah, lots of playing around with meter, a little bit of playing around with tempo that might inform some of the meter changes, and all of that is done on top of that black metal foundation, the constantly playing 16th notes, that drive, that momentum, that forward movement of music, that constant assault of sounds. And then we work in, of course, the growls, pretty much a staple of black metal. These tended to be more full growls than I tend to associate with the genre. I don't really think it changes my opinion on the song much. I don't have a favorability of growls yet. I'm still working towards enjoying them. Right now, I'm still at that point where I tolerate them. They don't detract from songs anymore. But I do think it was interesting to hear that fuller, lower growl and not the typical black metal growl that you know what I'm thinking of? Is the blackened growl. I think that's what I'm thinking of. The thinner, maybe a little higher up style one. I think that's blackened. Alright, so maybe this is a pretty typical growl for death metal then. But yeah, it just adds on to the cacophony because you're going to get a ton of vocal distortion put in there. You're going to get overtones and undertones out of the growls. It's going to provide some extra compression on top of the overdrive and distortion that you have in the guitar and the bass and the drums, and you're really creating a lot of musical friction here, combining all of these elements together. I do want to talk about that bass real quick though. I almost didn't realize that the bass was there. Somewhere around the middle of the song, the bass didn't play. It was only a couple of notes, I think, or maybe the guitar was moving while the bass was staying still, something like that. And I realized just how weak the guitar actually sounded by itself. And that's when I put two and two together, that the bass is probably playing root tones underneath whatever the guitar is playing, and it's providing the punchiness and the weight and the low end to the melodic passage. Now, normally I'd say it's a bad thing, and I kind of want to lean that way anyways, because I feel like it's underutilizing the bass. But when you're writing music like this, you want it to be heavy, you want it to be punchy. It does, the bass does what it needs to do. A moving bass line also might not work so well, because a lot of this style of music is about not necessarily the music itself, not the melodic aspect, but the textural and rhythmic aspect. So actually having a bit of a moving bass line or bass work that is rhythmically different than the guitar, it might subtract from what the band is actually trying to achieve with the song, with the writing. So I'm kind of torn there. I understand why it's done. I appreciate that it's part of the what they wanted the bass to do, and it had a job and it did it perfectly. But it's tragic to me how often the bass gets underutilized, and I really have to separate when it's being underutilized and when it's just being utilized in a way that traditionally would be underutilized, but actually is very important for the piece of art. And here I think it leans closer to the side that it's a necessary component, that without the bass doing what it's doing, even if it is a rather simple idea, that the song is very definitely changed. The sonic identity of it is. So yeah. I really dig that halftime section at the end, though. I do want to touch on that real quick. We kind of reduced, not necessarily the rhythmic complexity, but the rhythmic speed. We moved from 16th notes down to 8th notes in pretty much every instrument. And instead of playing chords on the guitar, they shifted to a more melodic idea with a melodic passage, which added just a hint of melody writing that I think the song really benefited from, especially since we were working within a similar atmosphere, just less aggressive. I mean, the atmosphere of the song is moody, it's dark, there's a little bit of tension and creepiness to it all, and putting that slow melody line in it really brought that atmosphere to the forefront for a little bit, and allowed it to cut through the noise of the constant attacks. And I think it was just a beautiful decision. It really makes me wish that I could find more metal like this. But with melody attached to it. I like the atmosphere to it. There's weight, there's gravity, there's darkness to it. I think that it does something metal is very much angled to do. It really digs into the sound that metal can achieve, unlike most other genres. But the melody really allows the songs to come out and portray something other than just the heaviness and weight of it. I don't mind when songs just sound cool, but there is something about melody on top of really harsh foundations that just works very well for me. And that ending nailed it. I don't think there's anything else. I mean, the song, other than the halftime section, is fairly samey all throughout. They do subtle differences, and I'm sure people who are engrossed in the genre, maybe just have listened to a lot more of it than me, might be able to see some of the nitpicks in it, some of the nuances that I'm missing. But a lot of the song is just variations on 16th notes, constant attacks, wave of sound. I mean, that's kind of cool, but wall of sound, and just being like hyper aggressive. I pointed out some of the nuances while we were doing the reaction, and I kind of forgot some of them. But yeah, like I said, there might be some who can see the nuance. To me, a lot of the song was kind of samey in the overhead picture of it. So I think that is going to end my analysis. I gotta go back and check that one out that we did on the live stream though, and kind of compare it to Abscission and see if this is a band I could get into, or if maybe this was a one-off. I still want more melody though. I want this writing with melody all throughout. Anyways, those are my thoughts. Abscission, Deathspell Omega. Probably got the Deathspell Omega's Abscission. This is where you guys come in though. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know what's up. Let me know if you enjoyed this or not. Anything that stuck out to you. If you're big into the genre and, you know, something stuck out to you, possibly that helped support this idea of being more dissonant than usual. Maybe some things that they did that I just didn't pick up on. Go ahead and drop those comments down there. Above the comments section, there's a description box. In there is a link for Linktree, which is a fantastic resource. It'll take you to a menu with everything related to the channel. Maybe you want to follow me on Twitter, support me through Patreon, join the Discord community, email me, submit a special selection, all sorts of stuff. All right, head on over there, see what's up. Above the description box, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. We got one more video coming up in 2.5 minutes. We're going to be looking at a special selection. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. UTC. As usual, we'll be finishing up this week's theme of Dissonance and looking at a song from a band who has contacted me to check out their music. I seriously need to come up with a name for that. We have themed episodes. We have special selection. We have, you know, Bryan recommends. And then there's songs that bands have made and want me to check out. That one doesn't quite roll off the tongue. I used to call it Sounds from My Inbox. I guess that still works. Maybe that's what I'll call it from now on. I don't know. We'll see tomorrow. See if I can remember to say that, or if I'll just fall back on old habits of rambling. Alright, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.